Today at Embr, its hosts Robb, Vallozzi, and Jason Dominique and their guests are not financial advisors unless otherwise disclaimed. The content on Today at Embr is for educational and entertainment purposes only and merely cite their own personal opinions. Know that all investments involve some form of risk. Please work with an investment professional. And now, on to the show.
Hello, and happy Thursday. Welcome to episode 25 of Today at Embr, an informative podcast series brought to you by the Embr Project, where we speak about multiple subjects matter. We also bring on guests when we can. This week is a special Say at Embr live episode where myself, your host, Robb Vallozzi, joined by my co-host and CEO of the project, Jason Dominique. Jason, how are you doing today, buddy?
Fantastic. Thanks, Rob. I think sometimes we should just put that music in the background, where it just sets the mood.
I know. This way is a way to fade it in. It's a nice way to fade it in the background.
I think so.
Instead of a hard cut like that.
Let's do that. Let's do that because it's really sets the mood. I love it. But yeah, doing great. How about yourself, Rob?
I'm doing pretty great, man. Absolutely. I think this week too, we thought it was time that you and I had just a discussion. You and I, there's a lot of stuff that's been going on in the markets. We believe that you and I have a particular take that, a lot of things the media is not looking at. For those that are in the crypto sector, we can see what the media is focused on now, what they're talking about. We don't really think that's relevant. We think that's a lot of noise. So Jason and I like to have our own sort of discussion on what's happening. We're going to talk about payment systems, how DeFi is going to be implemented. We're going to be talking more about Embr, what we have coming in for the future. But first, we'd like to start out with, what the crypto winter. That's what the big conversation with a lot of people are. I know that I was making a joke off air that, even last season, we've been now that we're here, I think that we have some insight and what we've been thinking about kind of planning for this.
Yeah. I mean, like you're saying, we saw the winter coming, and I think that, and this is something it's not the first time we talk about this. Any sane business person has to, find ways to bring stability to his business. And if you look at the traditional business world, I mean, everybody will tell you, don't put all your eggs in the same basket. And, we need to see, it doesn't matter if it's Web 2, Web 3, or whatever, at the end of the day, you can't be too heavily reliant on one source of not necessarily revenue, but different streams of activity. The token is great, but ultimately, what's important is definitely to be a sustainable business, and broadly speaking, it's funny how in Web3, a lot of projects are all about creating utility, and this is something that totally was new to me when I started working in that space, and I was like, well, no kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Of course it has to have a utility. When a startup in the world is like, wait, you don't have a product? What are you selling? Just air here?
Yeah, I was like, how can I not think about utility? It's what's the purpose then? It's just speculation. That's not going to happen.
I think the numbers even show it. In startup, 99% of people in the real startup tech world, it's all about utility. Only occasionally do you have certain projects will slip through that are all, frankly, excuse my language, kind of bullshit and selling air. Where right now with what we're calling, I guess, the post Luna times now in the sector, that only 1% of projects that they're showing here only have actual utility. Only 1%. It's almost flipped in this business, and I think that that's something that when we first decided to build this project, that was the first thing that you always had that we wanted to do moving forward, is to make sure we have actual real utility and a real purpose and real revenue models, and I think Web3 is that avenue to do so.
Yeah, and again, to build parallel with the startup space in Web 2 is, if you look back when it really sort of exploded, the initial first days where a lot of investment was flowing in, just like a bit like in Web 3. um, Most project, and this is where you can similarly build sort of parallel, is that most businesses did not have revenue models. They had utility, but they had no revenue model. If you look like Facebook, for 10 years, they did not have a revenue model. If you look at, they were all about growth, and they were all about ingestion and reducing the amount of friction as much as possible. And it was like, who can get to the most amount of whichever metric you want to focus on, whether it's daily active, monthly active, or monetizable user, or whatever. But ultimately, all these VCs, they were simply looking at growth. They weren't looking at revenue. And I think that similarly in crypto, right now in Web3, what's happening is, regarding sort of the utility standpoint, it's like, does the project does it have traction? Is it attracting a lot of eyes, and is it popular, and all those sorts of things? But does it have real sustainable utility? Most of them don't. And and they still attract quite a lot of investment, but they're short-sighted,
and mostly speculative.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, I mean, you can't plan to be the luckiest one to be extremely popular, and to have everyone talk about you. So you can't sort of put that in your business plan. It's like,
yeah,
it's like, what's your go-to market strategy? Is like being lucky.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you want to be the realist, well, ultimately you have to be, even though you have big ambitions, and you aspire to greatness. You have to be grounded, and you have to build something that truly feels, how can I say, it truly fixes a real problem. So for me, when I got into Web3, it was a no-brainer. It's like, what are we fixing, and are we fixing it in a way that is truly remarkable? Because I'm not interested in incremental change. I'm interested in disruptive change, and that's really what's going to get people moving. It's not like, well, there's, and I'm not interested in a feature war. I'm not interested in, we have this feature and they have this feature,
so we have to have this feature, and then
like, I don't care about
their
this
feature. Yeah,
I don't care about this. I'm really more, and I think this is the culture of Embr. I think we're all about like vision, and really like more broad speaking type of endeavor, that not necessarily are going to be timeless, but that need to be sort of need to endure all the different phases of crypto, because it moves so fast. You can't change things every 3 months because the space has evolved or changed or anything like that. You need to have a constant north, and that north, it can't be based on a feature war anyway.
Well, also too, as well, as what people don't understand is that when running a business, it's not like riding a jet ski. It's more like navigating an aircraft carrier. It takes, you have to have a vision and what your purpose is, and have a sole singular focus on that. Because to able to, if you're chasing features or chasing trends, to be able to move that aircraft carrier, it's a Herculean effort to do so. And then by the time you actually are changed direction, then the tides are changing again, and then next thing you know, you're just becoming an entirely reactive company, and then those are never successful. Yeah. And coming to parallels, also, I did want to bring this up. There's an old saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but it always rhymes. And Mark Cuban made a great statement talking about how in the 90s, we are seeing something similar as what we're happening now in this space. Is that first there was a lot of hype, a lot of speculation, a bunch of people jumping into it. It created a bit of a bubble. We saw that, pets.com is the most notorious, or
Jet.com was worse after just trying to kill Amazon. Like who remembers Jet.com? Nobody.
I know. So there was a lot of speculative push into there. And then, of course, that bubble burst. And then, of course, there was the whole talk about, is the internet just a fad? It's all speculative. And then it took some time to where we had this transition into what we now see as Web 2, which is, now pretty much changed the world when it comes to stuff like, social media, the way media itself, pretty much we've put newspapers out of business at this point. I mean, no one could have seen the trajectory that we're at. And Mark Cuban was making that same parallels of that's what we saw in the first couple of years of crypto. There was this huge, boom and excitement, a lot of hype around it, but no one really knew how to, at least when it comes to, the average everyday retail investor, no one really understood what its power can be and how you can actually utilize that and turn it into utility. And now with the beginning of Web3, which is something that, we were talking, last year when all the hype was NFTs, we were focused on Web3. Now everyone's talking about Web3, but we already have ourselves put ourselves in a position to where, we can take advantage of what we will see the upcoming hype coming into the next year or so when we go to, reach out to investors and VC and those kind of things, especially with our product.
Yeah. And you know what? And you're right, Rob. I mean, if you look at the general sort of status of the NFT market right now, and that was to be expected. A lot of people made a lot of money, and that's great. But most of the space is about 97% down. So when you think about making sure that you have utility and you're not just about speculation, because right now there's no more speculation. It's like it's either you're bag holding or just like the project is like literally dead. So thinking ahead, when for us it's always been about this layer, this application layer with Web3, and when we set ourselves up for what we knew would be the enduring sort of talk of the town, and not only did we look into this space of like how can we make sure that we're addressing real problem, we also felt that in that space specifically, the biggest barrier, and again it's going back to what you said, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it's a bit similar with when payments started to appear on the internet. And it's the same thing with here right now is, with this migration, we feel that the biggest roadblock beyond obviously education and, those long-term behavioral and learning curve and all those sorts of things, we feel that the biggest blocker right now is when this checkout process, when you want to, it's the whole payment infrastructure, but beyond payment infrastructure, it's the experience itself. So this is why we're tackling what we feel is one of the, if not the biggest, friction point to onboard all those millions of people in the space, because it's only when people can be financially, emotionally involved or implicated that they start to care. And once they've passed that threshold, then they start caring, and then they start spreading the word. And if we can make this easy and enjoyable, that's going to be great. And that really sort of, maybe you want to touch base on that topic, Rob, but I think this is a great sort of segue into, traditional payment, like how it's
legacy
been run.
Payment platforms. Yeah, and I think also too is it's funny you say this, is it actually does segue into what our next topic was going to be. when you're talking about, when people are emotionally invested and when they make it enjoyable, when it makes it fun also too, and when there's a level of interaction there, one of the biggest friction points is that accessibility part of it, to have people to have access to it. But by being those things, by being fun, by having, to where it makes sense to you, where you're emotionally involved. Right now, in the way the payment system works in traditional, legacy payment platforms, Visa, MasterCard, I don't care if it's Apple Pay or just, when it comes to your regular debit card, it's been, pretty much the same way for 50 years. There's nothing exciting about that. There's nothing it can be something to be innovative in that space, or at least people thought until recently. For those that are unaware, that the way that this country and our economy really works is really about risk aversion and debt settlement. So when the actual physical currency of a dollar it's not a digital asset. It's not ones and zeros on a computer, as people would some say. It still is backed by hard currency. You can't or even gold. Some of these things, these assets that are not transferable in a digital way. And the way that traditional finance works is that, let's say I pay something with a Chase card, the money isn't actually instantaneously transferred over to let's say Wendy's or Chipotle like you would with a digital asset. Like if you were to do, let's say, buy something with Embr, where that happens immediately. The way debt service and debt settlement works in this country is that you're basically the bank is saying that your credit is good enough with us to where we're going to float you with this amount of money that we're hoping that you can somehow cover on the back end. We're going to connect all those dots, and Chipotle is going to hope that that money is still going to come through, because they're being reassured by these different banks that when that money is actually going to come in at some specific point. And because we're doing all this work on the background to make sure that happens, we're going to charge the merchant a large, substantial amount of, a substantial part of your business. These fees can add up very, very quickly, because we're here to make sure that to settle all that debt, to have these guarantees, etc. So we're charging you a large amount.
Yeah. And I think it's great that we're touching base on this, because there's not, I mean, at the end of the day, how it works, it's not not everybody wants to know how it works. What matters to the end user. They don't care
about how the sausage is made. They don't care about how the sausage is made.
Exactly. The end user, they just want it to work. Like, I don't care how it works. Just, when I get there, I want to pay, and I want you to give me what I want. And that's it, So, when we started, not we, but like as a society, when we started, or when we wanted to bring this physical asset, which is the dollar, or whichever country you're in, it's something that isn't inherently digital. So since it isn't, then the whole system had to figure out a way to move it. And essentially what they found is there's no way of making it move fast. So ultimately it has to rely on, what they call is sort of a promise of future settlement. And not, as you're saying, Rob, this created a lot of problems, because this problem at the core of it is sort of who is, like, first of all, who, like, how can I say? So it automatically created the necessity of a trust system, of a trust of future settlement. And that means it's a credit trust. So this whole,
like a promissory note.
Yeah. So this whole empirical sort of world that is dominated by, two essentially big companies, which are Equifax and TransUnion. I don't know if you have other in America, but
those are our two biggest ones here, Equifax and TransUnion.
In Canada, these are the two big ones, and they are the one that essentially, based on big data and all those sorts of things, they're the one that decide if you're good for it or if you're not good for it. But the bottom line is
also, too, just to add on that as well, is that it's a very opaque process too on how they're making those calculations to decide what your level of credit is. So that's even another factor. We can get into that later of why DeFi changes that. But these very obtuse, metrics that you really have no idea of what's affecting your credit or not.
Yeah. But where I wanted to get to is, unfortunately, getting a credit score is not something. I mean, it's for the privilege. It's not something like when we were talking about, in last week's episode, about global income coin. Having an ID is something for the privilege.
Mhm.
Have a verifiable ID is not something that everybody in the world has.
Something we take for
So
granted in the westernized world.
yeah, exactly. And I think the world that we live in terms of transactions and how money flows between, because what is a payment system? A payment system it's how do we take, or like how do we move money from point A to point B?
Yeah, how do we
Uh,
escrow from point A to point B? We're the intermediary between those people.
Yeah. So, and if you look at the more commerce side of things, is how do you facilitate value transfer between B2B and B2C? And that's, well, mostly B2C to B2B, because it's the customer that pays the business, but
Hmm.
it's not so much two way. But if you get a refund, it needs to work sort of two ways. But how do you enable the flow of value uh, based on something that isn't digital? So it created this big monster, this massive headache that essentially is built on a future promise of settlement and is reserved exclusively to the privileged, to the Western world, and the more
Countries, yeah.
yeah, exactly. So when I got into crypto, and more specifically, Web3, and even more DeFi, this is where I got my aha moment, and that's where I thought to myself, wow, this is the moment where we can truly create, or at least build something that 60, 70 years ago, if the currency that we had at that moment was digital, then we wouldn't have to build this whole, like, Visa and MasterCard. They would have never existed, because they exist only to provide this bridge of money in the meantime.
Hmm.
I mean, they support most of all of this float, and they
But
settle everything
plus
for.
also too a segmented market. I mean, when this was first designed, they didn't think there would be. I mean, I don't know how many banks there are out there. I mean, the amount of different, everything from things like Ally to like more traditional banking, like Chase or Western, Wells Fargo, to be able to connect all these and be the intermediary between them, to be able to have these credit checks between them all happening. That's why the market cap of MasterCard, Visa, I think it's like what,
Like
500
four,
billion or
yeah,
something.
something like that. And these guys are ripe for disruption, and I'd be ready to put my hand in, on a pile of embers, and essentially tell you, in 5 years, unless they truly innovate in ways we can't even fathom, Visa and MasterCard will be gone. They'll be
Hmm.
totally gone. And that will be a massive shift, because DeFi and the blockchain is the first sort of infrastructure, this bare infrastructure that lets sort of money flow instantly between point A and point B, like real assets backed by liquidity. Like, it's not like
It transfers immediately. There's no debt settlement. This is actually really going from point A to point B immediately. They have it in there. You actually have
yes,
it backlight liquidity. You have the actual value of it.
yes, and we're removing all of these intermediaries, all of these processes, all of these red tapes, all of these deep, deep pockets of people that are like creating economies out of nothing on the back of like merchants, and all those sorts of things. And like, this thing needs to go. Like, it
Yeah,
needs to
yeah.
go. We're here. This is really our time right now. The previous the old guard, if you think of Stripe, PayPal, and all these guys, they had to figure out a way to build a transactional layer on top of the internet. But now, everybody knows that, the backbone of what everything will be is blockchain. And now we're in the moment of creating the transactional layer on top of blockchain. And this will enable things that we could only dream. 15 years, when they built that on the internet, but even before, when 50, 60 years ago, when they had to create this system for future settlement. So I'm super excited because the path that we're on truly delivers this essential um, uh, service, which is an instant settlement on. I mean,
on a purchase of goods, yeah, on anything really.
Yeah, well, right now we enable, with the first version of Ember Checkout, we enable like the purchase of a token, of a Web3 enabled project, but the path that we've embarked on is a path where we feel that in the future, and the future is quite soon, it's the next 2 to 5 years. It's a moment where everybody will probably own multiple different types of currencies, different types of assets, and these assets, if they're backed by liquidity, then they should be, they should be, or they should be considered as something that could be transferable to anyone without any condition, and then the other party could decide to receive whichever currency that he wants. And in the middle, this is where all the magic happens. And this is sort of the peer-to-peer Ember, where you take any asset and you enter a merchant commerce situation use case, and they decide, I'm the kind of guy that believes and I want to receive that type of currency, whether it's a stable or not. And we settle that on the blockchain, and you decide whichever default. It's almost like with Apple Pay, you have your wallet, and when I enter a shop, I'm like, okay, I put it on the tap and I choose which card I use to pay for this. I can set one as a default, but I can also, on the moment, on the spur of the moment, change where I'll take my liquidity from. And it's the same thing with how we envision being DeFi, the backbone of this future instant settlement based on any liquidity that you want. You imagine a world, and this is very, very real.
Yeah, where the end user, like as myself, goes into let's say, or it goes to any merchant or whatever that use case may be. I decide what asset I want to pay with in liquidity, and they get to decide, and they have all the agency to decide how they want to receive that liquidity. Do they want to receive it in Polygon? Do they want to receive it in some layer 2 on the Ethereum network, and all that stuff happens instantaneously without that whole debt settlement part of it. And I think also too is it's so smart you bring this up, Jason, because I think a lot of the conversation that people are talking about when they, when I was just at that Bitcoin conference, I follow a lot of stuff that's being said in the media, and a lot of people talk about, when they talk about the blockchain, they're always saying how the level of transparency and how this is a way to get rid of that opaque nature of traditional finance. That's all well and good. But at the end of the day, when it comes to investors or even raising capital, or, on how things are changing, by having everything, every purchase, every time I went to Chipotle, every time I went to 7-Eleven, to have that registered on the blockchain permanently, that's not very exciting. When you say it, people are like who excuse my language, but who gives a shit that it's a permanent register of how many times I went to Chipotle? No one cares about that. But they be able to have what we believe is the real utility. What we're talking about is giving agency to both the merchant and to the consumer by having assets, avoiding that whole debt settlement. I think that's really the real power of crypto. That's a conversation I don't think anyone's talking about. I mean, some people are, but the broader conversation I think is missing that mark.
Yeah, and then they can off ramp if they want. I mean, it's truly up to them. But I think, I mean, there's great projects, on blockchain and on different layer ones, and that they're very like the settlement is. I think that the inherent issue here is that most of all these other sort of solution, there are either one coin specific, like hypothetically, if I use like BitPay or something like that, and you as a merchant, you say, I want to start accepting crypto, and I use BitPay. BitPay is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. It's massive. It's not on the blockchain. They just facilitate. They don't have tokens or anything like that. They're just like a business, but that facilitate merchant to accept cryptocurrencies. But if I'm a merchant, let's say I'm the store that sells flowers or books online, and I accept digital currency, well, I can't say, well, if I do, then I'll be pretty much, limiting. But let's say I only accept USDC or something like that, then it automatically implies that me as a customer, I need to be holding USDC because that's what you take. And so that's very narrow-minded. It's not the world of openness and all of this that we've envisioned. It's still the same thing as
what traditional finance is now, just putting a new coat of paint on it. They're still using the same old playbook. They're still using that same.
Yeah.
They're approaching it in the same business model, but now they're just replacing the dollar with this specific asset, and they're still making people hold to that.
I think it's sort of putting like blinds on the actual reality, and the reality is that it's going to be a very, very diversified type of world where people will be holding currencies not based on geography. They'll be holding the future, these type of economies will be built around culture, around ethos, around like vision, and all those sorts of things. And people are going to gather around these type of assets, and we're already starting to see it. It's happening right now in the DeFi world. You have these people that they're revolving around Bitcoin, and they're called maximalists, and you have these people that they believe in Solana, and you have these people that believe in Polygon, and you have these people that believe in in even like emerging chain like BitGert. And all of them are great. I can't say, that one, because at the end of the day, these chains, yes, there's features and benefits, but they're not in a feature and benefit war. They're also in an ethos and culture and vision, and this is where we're going. Are you in it? Or do you want to join us in what we're, seeing the world to be? And that means that in the next 5 to 10 years, while this is being built, people are going to be holding these assets. And these assets, they are liquid. They can be used as a currency. And if I go into the shop and I'm holding all these different assets, like, why can I use these assets instantly to give it to someone else, and this other person can receive whatever he wants? And then we use the DeFi infrastructure to settle this and be the where the sausage is done. This is what we are, just as a Visa and all these other legacy systems where they figure it out for you, because how it's done, nobody cares. Nobody cares. It's about, can you make it happen? And Embr is building the thing that makes it happen.
I totally agree, and I think it's interesting because last week when we interviewed the guys from Global Income Coin, he made and what they're doing with their asset, which I thought was pretty interesting. And one of the statements he made was that they're making an asset that's actually that they want to use to be spent, because when it comes to certain things like Bitcoin and stuff like that, that people are talking about this, that really people are buying these things just to hold. So because they see it as speculatory to have some, level of, whether that's to hedge against inflation or try to get rich or whatever your motivation is to be able to hold some of these assets. But the good thing is now with something like Embr is that you can decide of what is the asset that you want to spend and what is you want to hold. We'll have the wallet there that decide, hey, okay, these are the speculative coins I'm holding as an investment. These are the ones that I have because I want to be able to use them and spend them because they work better depending on the blockchain or whatever my motivation is to do so. All of that will be in one place. They'll be able to have that utility if they want to have it while still working in the DeFi world. A lot of people, are sometimes confused when they say something like with Coinbase and they're like, well, Coinbase sort of lets you do something like that. Not necessarily, no. Coinbase is still operating on when it goes to purchasing something with their card is still working in that debt, the debt settlement world. They're just taping that beyond there without any transparency, without any, plus the fees are exorbitant. You don't really know what's happening for gas fees and those kind of things. That's not DeFi. That's just them trying to take, the traditional.
That's like almost that's almost like a neobank. Like it's essentially like a neobank. And you know what? The latest revelation, which is not a revelation. I mean, at the end of the day, like
that's. I think people are seeing that too because their stock has taken a major dive. So
well, I mean, without going down the history lane, but when people saw that, if Coinbase goes bankrupt, essentially what you're leaving there in your custodial wallet, well, they could actually use that to settle their debt, or that could be well, I mean, that's always been the case with banks. It's always been the case. And the biggest example is Argentina. When the whole country collapsed, what happened? And the banks, people tried to go to the bank and withdraw their money and their pension, and they
couldn't.
I'm sorry, it's gone. It's just gone. Like, and
for those who don't realize, in the States, FDIC only insures up to $250,000. Anything above that amount, and the bank goes under, they're taking that money with you.
So wake up call. It's like, guys, it's like it's not your money. If you put it there, it's not your money. It's their money. And ultimately, they have the keys to your money. So I'm not saying that everybody should hold their keys of their money, but when comes the time to truly own what we all work like crazy to earn, it becomes slippery now. It's like, okay, so like I don't even own the keys of my hard ass earned money,
and you're going to charge me to use it.
Pretty much.
That's even another part on top of it. Going to charge you to use it. I mean, for our younger viewers out there was a time when we used to put money in a savings account and you used to be able to make money off of it. Those days I haven't seen them since I was in high school, but that those times used to actually exist.
But yeah, so this is the world we envision. And like you're saying, I think it's not a debate of who will reign supreme, like which coin will reign supreme. None of them will be. They will all have their specific values and ethos, and you're going to be just like if you're holding that glow coin of last week's show, and you rock up at your liquor store or at the dog you want to buy dog food and things like that, and you have this currency in there, and you'd be like, you know what, this week I'm going to start using glow coin. Why? Because I want to support the idea that or the vision that I want to solve universal basic income. And that's a real possibility. And it's like and that's what I'm trying to say is there's no real winner. They're all winners. Like they're all winners in their own way. If they have liquidity, then we can let them be what they want to be. That's it. If they're not in there rug or something like that. Yeah.
You coined the term, when we started doing this as being, blockchain, what was the word that you used now?
Chain
agnostic. Yes.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's important too, because the great thing about us, and kind of come totally full circle now, is that we were talking before about having a real a business model and multiple revenue streams and multiple things that we're doing is that regardless of, there's not one coin to reign supreme, but regardless, we want to give agency to everyone. But no matter what coin is hot or at this particular time or what people are, Embr will always still have utility. Embr will always be able to leverage what's going on, in the space to give, all of these assets utility pretty much overnight, especially when this is launched. And that's what I think is really a sustainable business model, because of regardless of what's happening in the sector, what's happening with this coin, or, the whole Luna fiasco where, was it a stable coin or not? The great thing about our business model is that we're not reliant on these token, are entirely on our tokenomics. We obviously have, levers inside of our business model that are going to benefit the token and benefit our investors. We're always thinking about that. But at the end of the day, our revenue model and our business model is always going to be successful regardless of what's happening in the sector because of the utility that we're offering.
Yeah. And this is the only way we feel we can provide great and constant utility and innovation to our token by generating revenue. And that's how we can reinvest and finding unique and innovative ways to create more utility, and then more utility, and then more utility.
Starts to snowball after time.
Yeah. But also we need to be careful and not being too
jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah, exactly. So we're very, very focused at the moment, and we try to do that extremely well. So sometimes people might think, it's why isn't it ready or whatever. I mean, it'll be ready when it's going to be ready, because we want to do it extremely
Correct.
well. Yeah, exactly. And this is a hard ass problem that we're fixing. It's not that simple, and there's a lot of moving parts, something we've said before, but we're setting ourselves up for success. And when the time is right, which is very, very shortly, it's very, very soon, we'll go out with a bang.
Well, I think also, especially now too, I think that, especially our community and investors in general should be very understanding of this, especially in a time with there's such a high level of scrutiny now across the board with anything that's released in the sector, especially after, and I hate to sound redundant of bring up the Luna fiasco and some other projects out there of what's happened. I'm not going to name drop to avoid, kind of throwing dirts in their wounds. But that, with this with what's going on there, such a high level of scrutiny. Now everything we launch, it has to be world class, has to meet a certain standard, because people are going to be going through these things, stress testing it, going through with a fine tooth comb, because people want to believe in certain projects and everything. But now they say, fool
they've
me once,
been burned
shame on
so
me.
much.
Burn me
People
once,
have
shame
been
on
burned.
me. Mm-hmm. Burn me twice, shame on me. You know what I mean? So. Yeah. They're at this point, they're not playing around anymore, and we're aware of that, and that's something that we've always been doing from the forefront. That's why something you've kind of built in one of our community of our company cultures is to do everything world class, because there will be a time when this is held to a standard, and we're seeing that now of any traditional startup or tech company.
Yeah. And yeah, it's the burden that we decided to put on ourselves, and it's to lead by example and set the standard, and that comes with a lot more work to be done, especially in a space where it's there's a lot of innovation, but it's a bit chaotic, so we try to bring a little bit more clarity to really because the thing that truly surprised me the most, and I've ranted multiple times on that subject, and but what truly surprised me the most is project leaders in the DeFi space, they're supposed to be the one that are sort of what we could call anti-FUD,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is this
their
word.
job is to be the steward of making sure people feel certainty, making sure they feel good about their investment.
Yeah, making sure that they feel safe, making sure that, they have a great experience, and making sure, the list goes on and on and on and on. But then, but yet they're the one that not automatically, but they decide to send people
to direct them to.
Yeah, they direct them in a place of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You know, when you send someone that is hyped about your coin, unless he's a crypto veteran or a crypto enthusiast, if he's just a crypto curious, he lands on your website, he thinks this is amazing, and he clicks on buy now, and you send him to a place he's never been before. He doesn't understand the whole mechanics of a DEX. He's like,
and those things are
where
cryptic to
the
begin with.
fuck did I just land in? Like, what the hell is this? And I'm like, this is the purest definition of FUD: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I'm fearful of what I'm seeing right now. I am uncertain because and I have extreme level of doubts. Like, is this gonna work?
How do I use this now? And it seems totally cryptic.
Even if you give me 12 steps on how to do it, it doesn't cut it. It does not cut it. It's still gonna create FUD. Maybe not the type of FUD that is sort of seen in the space where someone is spreading FUD. Spreading FUD is like something that, you know, whatever. I mean,
it's a byproduct of just the space.
Yeah, but the real FUD is the one that every single person is experiencing when they enter the space. And
it's tangible and palpable. When you go on there, it even happens to me today when we bring on these new chains. Some of these things when we're exploring and bringing on projects and these new dexes, and I'll go to there and I'm like, I'm even scared of it. And I'm supposedly a veteran who knows how to do this stuff. I'm like, whoa, what is this exchange?
Yeah. And the problem with Web3, because we've been promised that Web3 should be amazing. Like, it should be like the next iteration of the internet. But it feels way worse. Like, it feels really complicated.
It feels foreign.
It feels foreign. So if I'm coming from Web 2, where I have this beautiful experience and everything's exciting and easy and
there's continuity and a design language I understand.
Exactly. And you're telling me that the next big thing is Web 3, and I enter in there and I'm like, hell no. I'm staying in Web 2. And you know what? We feel that the biggest problem of Web 3 is it's because it doesn't feel like Web 2. That's simply put, because Web 3 needs to feel like Web 2. That's the only way you'll get everybody to come. And this is what we're focused on. We're focused on making sure, you know, that the migration will not be felt. It'll be just as simple and just as easy and just as enjoyable. And there's not going to be any FUD. It's almost like you need to do interviews every day. And you're like, you know what? You went into Web3. How did you feel? Well, I felt all of these things. Okay, let's address all of these things and make sure next time you come, you're not experiencing any of those things. And that's basically our motto. And
what's funny is that for some reason, this always happens in the industry, which you think by now that they would learn, that every time occasionally when it comes to a new version of something where it's pretty much the next upgrade, it has a lot of promises, that somehow that they don't have that continuity from the last iteration to this iteration, and it feels foreign, and it becomes a big issue with adoption. I mean, even Windows had this issue. Remember years ago when they got rid of the start button? And they had to do this whole big backtrack and all this kind of stuff. People were like, what is going on here? So for some reason, you know, the tech sector, you know, they have such ambition and they want to be disruptive. You see a lot of these terms used all the time. We're trying to be the next disruptive thing. They go so far in that direction that they forget that, you know, you need to bring these people along with you, that you have to have a way to make them adopt this next iteration for it to feel comfortable to where, and they see it's useful and be like, wow, this is a better version, not, oh my God, what did you just throw me into? And I think that's something that we've been focused on from the beginning here. And just to give a little, to allude to something very quickly too, for those of you that, you know, are very big on our community, I know some of the community members have noticed. We're not going to make any announcements here, but we do suggest that, you know, if you want to see what some of the big plans are that we have in the works, to go to our website. You're going to see something, I guess that could be a little Easter egg of things to come that we have working, and something that we're going to be integrating across the board. And we think it's really our home run idea that's going to make integration easier and accessibility easier. And I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, it's going to make Web 3 feel like Web 2. We call it the checkout launcher, and essentially it's something that follows you just like a chat bubble. If you need any support or anything like that, then you can trigger it. But it's not about support. It's about if you're a Web3 enabled project and one of your core is to sell and to
Your
get
asset.
People to be able to purchase your token, then you got to make it easy, and you got to make it enjoyable, and you got to make it seamless and frictionless, and that's what it is. So
yeah, it's working now. It's working now. You guys go ahead, go to join Embr, EMBR.com. You guys can easily find it. It's a little bit Easter egg. I don't want to give too much away of what it is, but it's so seamless and so easy and works so well. You'd be like, oh, okay. Like it's again, the simplicity is so great. It's complicated behind the scenes, but it's so simplistic. People are like, oh yeah, that's easy. Like this, like why did no one ever think of this before?
Yeah. So, I mean, so hopefully we've been able to, there wasn't any specific plan in this show, but hopefully we've been able to enlighten you on, if you didn't know yet, well, at least now you know that, how truly powerful DeFi is compared to the legacy system, and how we intend on leveraging that technology. And we're not the only one. I mean, there's a lot of endeavors out there and lots of projects that are very, very focused on payments at the moment, whether they are Coinbase, whether they are,
Flues or one of those other products.
Yeah. There's so many projects out there, but it's not necessarily. I mean, we're all in this together, and ultimately, we have a way of seeing, the next iteration of this whole transactional payment layer, and we're super excited about it.
Well, and just to add to really quick before we get out of here, we're approaching our time, is that, competition, I believe, is always a good thing, especially too in this space, because when we have a lot of people trying to solve the same problem in different ways, the good thing is that we can see what other projects are doing, or other organizations, seeing where they're not hitting the mark properly, seeing the pitfall, avoiding the pitfalls that they kind of came across. And we're able to use that information to what I believe, especially when you take a look at what I think is really one of the most frictionless ways to buy a currency on a website, or to buy an asset in general, which would be a great way to buy anything in the future moving forward. I think that we really are setting the standard, and I hope the community gets to see that. And we'll speak a lot more about that when we do our real full-on launch coming up shortly.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. So I think that really wraps it up for today. We're excited about next week. We have some exciting new guests, and keep an eye out on the socials. You'll be able to see who's coming on today at Embr next week.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Like I said, go ahead, make sure you follow us, subscribe, like. You can always catch us anywhere you catch any of your favorite podcasts on any of those platforms. Jason, it's been a real pleasure. I am your host, Robb Vallozzi. This has been another episode of Today at Embr. See you guys next week.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Today at Embr. If you like the show, please rate and review. You can find us on all of the major podcasting platforms. You can also tune in to our live stream on YouTube and subscribe to our channel. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.